The warning sirens started at exactly 0347 station time, their harsh wail cutting through the quiet hum of the Catherian research station. Senior researcher Vexhai lifted her scaled head from the data terminal where she had been reviewing mineral samples from the dead world below. Her four eyes blinked in sequence as the emergency lights bathed the laboratory in pulsing red. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat. All personnel to emergency stations. The voice belonged to Station Commander Growlmoth, but Vexhai had never heard such fear in the old Catherian's voice before. In her 20 cycles of service aboard the station, she had weathered meteor storms, equipment failures, and even a small pirate raid. This was different. She moved quickly through the corridors, her clawed feet clicking on the metal floor. Other researchers emerged from their quarters and labs, all wearing the same expression of confused worry. The station housed 47 beings from 12 different species, all dedicated to studying the mineral wealth of dead worlds in this remote sector. They were scientists, not soldiers. The main briefing room filled quickly. Commander Growlmoth stood at the front, his usually pristine uniform wrinkled and his face pale beneath his blue scales. Behind him, the main display showed a star map of their sector, dotted with red warning markers that seemed to multiply as they watched. 3 hours ago, we lost contact with Mining Station Beta 7, the commander began. 2 hours ago, the research platform at Kepler's Edge went silent. 1 hour ago, we received this transmission from the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. The display flickered, then showed the interior of a ship's bridge. The image was grainy and broken, filled with static. A reptilian captain appeared on screen, his eyes wide with terror. Mayday, Mayday, this is Captain Shendar of the Lucky Strike. We are under attack by unknown vessels. They came out of nowhere, just appeared from empty space. The ships they're alive somehow. Bioorganic. They're not responding to any communication attempts. They're just eating everything. Our shields are failing. They're cutting through, the hull like it's made of paper. Oh gods, they're inside the ship now. I can hear them in the corridors. The crew is screaming. They're not taking prisoners. They're just consuming everything. If anyone receives this, warn the outer colonies. Don't let them spread. Don't let them... The transmission cut to static, then silence. Vexhai felt her blood turn cold. Around the room, other researchers shifted nervously. Dr. Thalek, the hegemony engineer, spoke first. Void hunters, he whispered, the words barely audible. The room fell silent except for the continued wailing of the alarm. Everyone knew the stories. The void hunters were nightmare creatures from the dark spaces between stars. They appeared without warning, consumed everything in their path, and vanished back into the black. Most civilized species considered them myths, stories told to frighten children. How long until they reach us? Asked Medical Officer Rinta, her melodic voice tight with worry. Commander Growlmoth checked his datapad. Long-range sensors show multiple biosignatures approaching our position. Current speed and trajectory suggest they will arrive within 6 hours. What about evacuation? Someone called out. The nearest Galactic Council fleet is 4 weeks away at maximum speed. Our own transport ships could reach the inner colonies in 2 weeks, but we only have enough life support for 30 beings on a long journey. The math was simple and terrible. 47 researchers, 30 evacuation spots, and hostile forces arriving in 6 hours. Vexhai looked around the room at her colleagues, her friends. Who would stay behind? Who would live? There is another option, Commander Growlmoth continued. We can implement Emergency Protocol 7, lock down the station, activate all defensive systems, and send out a distress beacon. The core laboratories have independent life support and can sustain all personnel for several weeks. Perhaps help will arrive. Dr. Thalek shook his head. Commander, with respect, the station's defenses are designed to ward off pirates and small raiders. If these truly are void hunters, our weapons will not stop them. Then what do you suggest, Doctor? The engineer's mandibles clicked together nervously. We fight as long as we can. We make our last stand meaningful, and we hope for a miracle. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. The station's small complement of security drones was activated and positioned at key choke points. Emergency barriers were erected in the main corridors. The research staff, trained in basic emergency procedures but not combat, did their best to prepare defensive positions. HFY found herself in the main laboratory with 7 other researchers watching the tactical display as red dots approached their position. The enemy ships were unlike anything in the database. They moved organically, flowing through space like living creatures rather than manufactured vessels. "First contact in 30 minutes, announced Dr. Thalek from his position at the engineering console. He had managed to boost the station's shields to 120% capacity, but everyone knew it would not be enough. The waiting was the worst part. HFY tried to focus on her research data, but the numbers blurred together on the screen. This station had been her home for 2 decades. These people were her family. The thought of losing everything made her chest tight with panic. "Contact," called out the sensor operator. Multiple bioships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Distance 200,000 kilometers and closing. On the main display, the enemy vessels appeared like nightmares made real. They were massive, easily 3 times the size of the research station, and they moved with a disturbing organic grace. Their hulls seemed to pulse and shift, covered in what looked like chitin and bone. Strange appendages writhed along their sides like tentacles or feeding tubes. "They're scanning us," reported the communications officer. "No response to our standard greeting protocols. They're just looking." The closest ship suddenly accelerated toward the station with shocking speed. Warning klaxons blared as automated defense systems engaged. The station's laser batteries opened fire, sending brilliant beams of energy toward the approaching vessel. The lasers struck the bioship's hull and simply disappeared, absorbed into the organic material like water into sand. The creature ship did not even slow down. "Brace for impact," Commander Growlmoth ordered. The collision never came. Instead, the bioship extended massive appendages that wrapped around the station's outer hull like the arms of some cosmic squid. The metal groaned and buckled under the pressure, and emergency alarms began screaming throughout the facility. "Hull breach on levels 7 through 12, Dr. Thalek reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Emergency bulkheads are sealing, but they're cutting through them somehow, using some kind of acid." More bioships arrived and attached themselves to different sections of the station. Through the external cameras, HFY could see smaller creatures emerging from the larger vessels. They moved like insects, all chitinous shells and razor-sharp claws, but they were the size of grown beings and moved with terrible intelligence. "All personnel to the core laboratories," the commander ordered. "Implement lockdown protocol. Emergency barriers to maximum power." HFY ran through corridors filled with the sound of grinding metal and hissing acid. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive skittering sound of claws on metal growing closer. The Void Hunters had found their way inside. The core laboratory complex was the most secure part of the station, built deep in the center and surrounded by multiple layers of reinforced barriers. 47 researchers crowded into spaces designed for 20, but no one complained. Outside the sealed doors, they could hear the sounds of the station being systematically torn apart. Dr. Thalek worked frantically at the engineering controls, trying to boost power to their defenses. Medical Officer Rinta organized supplies and checked on the wounded. 3 researchers had been injured in the rush to reach safety. "How long can we hold out?" someone asked. Commander Growlmoth checked the power readings. "Full life support for 2 weeks, basic life support for 4 weeks. The barriers will hold as long as we have power." The sound of cutting grew closer. Through the reinforced walls, they could hear the Void Hunters working their way deeper into the station. The creatures seemed to know exactly where the survivors were hiding, moving with purpose rather than randomly searching. "They're smart," whispered Dr. Thalek. "More intelligent than the stories suggest. They're not just animals. They're using tools, coordinating their attacks." A new sound joined the cutting, a rhythmic pounding on the outer barriers. The hunters had reached their defenses and were testing them systematically, looking for weak points. HFY activated the long-range communication array and began broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. "This is Catherian Research Station Delta 9 sending distress signal," We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. 47 personnel, trapped in core facility. Require immediate assistance, please respond. She sent the message over and over, knowing that in this remote sector no one was close enough to help. But it was better than sitting in silence, waiting for death to cut through their walls. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. The security cameras still functioning in the outer areas, they could see the Void Hunters clearly now. They were terrible to look at. Insectoid creatures with too many limbs and mandibles that dripped with digestive acids. Their eyes reflected the emergency lighting like black mirrors showing no emotion, no mercy. Barrier strength down to 80%, Dr. Thalek reported. The hunters worked with methodical patience, testing different spots on the barriers, learning from each attempt. They did not seem to be in any hurry. Why would they be? Their prey was trapped with nowhere to run. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the steady work of claws and acid on metal. The survivors took turns, monitoring the sensors, checking their supplies, and trying to rest despite the constant noise. Some tried to sleep. Others prayed to whatever gods their species worshipped. Vexhai found herself thinking about her research, all the discoveries that would be lost when they died. The mineral surveys, the geological data, the potential for new colony sites, all of it would vanish with them. She had spent her life trying to understand the universe, and now the universe was about to reclaim her. Barrier strength down to 60%, Dr. Thalek announced. His voice remained steady, but Vexhai could see the fear in his compound eyes. The distress beacon continued its automated broadcast, sending their location and situation into the vast emptiness of space. Each message was a bottle thrown into an infinite ocean, hoping against hope that someone would find it in time. But time was running out. The Void Hunters were patient, but they were also efficient. They would break through the barriers eventually, and when they did, the 47 survivors would join the countless other beings who had simply vanished into the darkness between stars. Vexhai closed her eyes and listened to the sound of her own death approaching, one acid burn and claw scrape at a time. The sound of acid eating through metal had become as constant as breathing. Vexhai jerked awake from an uneasy sleep to find that the emergency lighting had dimmed further, casting long shadows across the crowded laboratory. Her neck ached from sleeping against a supply crate, and her mouth tasted of recycled air and fear. Day 3, Dr. Thalek announced quietly from his position at the engineering console. The hegemony engineer had not left his post since the siege began, surviving on stimulant tablets and sheer determination. Barrier integrity down to 38%. Around the laboratory, the other survivors stirred at his words. Some had managed to sleep despite the constant noise from outside. Others simply stared at the walls with hollow eyes, having given up hope sometime during the long hours of waiting. Medical Officer Rinta moved between the groups with her portable scanner, checking on the health of their small community. 3. Days of stress, poor sleep, and recycled air were taking their toll. The injured researchers from the initial breach were stable but weak. Everyone else showed signs of exhaustion and malnutrition. How are our supplies? Commander Gralmoth asked. Rinta consulted her tablet. Food for 8 more days if we maintain strict rationing. Water recycling is functioning normally. Medical supplies are adequate for minor injuries, but if anyone suffers serious trauma— She did not need to finish the sentence. The pounding on the barriers had taken on a different rhythm during the night. Instead of random testing, the Void Hunters now seemed to be following a specific pattern, concentrating their efforts on 3 particular weak points. The creatures were learning, adapting their strategy based on what they discovered about the station's construction. They're not just animals, whispered Dr. Keeles, a young Centauri xenobiologist who had joined the station only 6 months ago. The way they coordinate the methodical approach, and that they're as intelligent as we are. Maybe more so. Vexhai nodded grimly. She had been watching the security feeds when they were still functional, studying the way the hunters moved and communicated. They used complex chemical signals, coordinating their actions with the precision of a military unit. But unlike any military she knew, they showed no mercy, No interest in negotiation or surrender. A new sound joined the cutting and pounding. A deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The laboratory's lights flickered and several sensitive instruments shut down automatically. "What was that?" someone asked. Dr. Thalek's mandibles clicked rapidly as he checked his readings. "They're doing something to the main power conduits. The vibration... I think they're trying to drain our energy directly." The implications were terrifying. If the hunters could somehow feed on the station's power systems, their defensive barriers would fail much faster than expected. Worse, they would lose life support throughout the station, leaving them trapped in a metal tomb. "Can you reroute power?" Commander Growlmoth demanded. "I'm trying, but they seem to know our systems better than they should. Every time I establish a new connection, they adapt and find it." The engineer's voice carried a note of grudging respect for their attackers. "It's like they're studying our technology in real time." The thrumming grew stronger and the lights dimmed to barely visible levels. Emergency power kicked in, providing just enough illumination to see by, but Vexhai knew they were running on borrowed time. She returned to the communication console and continued broadcasting their distress signal, though the power drain was affecting their transmission range. Each message now reached a smaller sphere of space, reducing their already slim chances of rescue. "This is Catherian Research Station Delta 9. She spoke into the microphone for what felt like the 1,000th time. 47 personnel trapped by hostile forces. Day 3 of siege, barriers failing. If anyone receives this transmission, please send help. We are located in the Outer Rim, Sector 77 Alpha. Please, anyone." Her voice cracked on the last word. 3 days of constant broadcasting had worn her throat raw, but she could not stop. As long as she kept transmitting, she was doing something. The alternative was sitting in the dark, waiting for death. A new alarm joined the symphony of warning sounds echoing through the laboratory. Dr. Thalek checked his instruments and cursed in his native language. "Atmosphere processing is failing," he announced. "The hunters have found our air recycling systems. We're losing oxygen at a rate of 2% per hour." Commander Growlmoth did quick calculations in his head. "How long?" "At current rates? 18 hours until the air becomes unbreathable. Less if they accelerate their sabotage." The news hit the survivors like a physical blow. Several of the younger researchers began to weep quietly. Others simply closed their eyes and began to pray. They had known the barriers would eventually fail, but they had hoped for more time, perhaps enough for a rescue that was never coming. "There has to be something we can do," Dr. Kalis said desperately. "Some way to fight back." Dr. Thalek shook his head. "We're researchers, not soldiers. Our equipment is designed for studying dead rocks, not fighting living nightmares. Even if we could somehow break out of this laboratory, there are hundreds of those creatures between us and any possible escape route." "Maybe that's not the point," Vexhai said quietly. When the others looked at her, she continued, "Maybe the point isn't to escape. Maybe it's to make sure someone knows what happened here, to leave a record." She gestured toward the databanks that lined the laboratory walls. "We have 20 years of research stored in these systems. Mineral surveys, stellar cartography, xenobiology studies. If we can somehow preserve this information, maybe our deaths will have meaning." Commander Growlmoth nodded slowly. "She's right. We can't save ourselves, but we might be able to save our work." Dr. Thalek began working at his console with renewed purpose. "I can create a compressed data package containing our most important research. If I can boost the communication array one more time, we might be able to transmit it to the deep space relay stations." It was not much of a legacy, but it was something. The survivors worked together to compile their life's work into a single transmission package. Medical data that might help treat rare diseases, geological surveys that could guide future colonization efforts, astronomical observations that added to the galaxy's understanding of stellar formation. As they worked, the sounds from outside grew more urgent. The void hunters seemed to sense that their prey was attempting something new, and their attacks intensified. The thrumming vibration increased until the laboratory floor itself began to shake. "Barrier integrity down to 15%, Dr. Thalek reported. His voice remained steady, but sweat beaded on his exoskeleton despite the cooling temperature. Medical Officer Rinta distributed the last of their stimulant tablets, trying to keep everyone alert for the final hours. Food rationing had become academic. They would not live long enough to starve. Young Dr. Kale sat beside Vex High at the communication console, helping to organize the data transmission. "Do you think anyone will remember us?" she asked quietly. Vex High looked around at her colleagues, her friends, beings from a dozen different worlds united by curiosity and the desire to understand the universe. They had come to this remote station seeking knowledge, and now they would die for it. "I think," she said carefully, "that we lived good lives. We spent our time learning, discovering, creating. That has to count for something." The data package was nearly complete when the main power finally failed. The laboratory plunged into darkness except for the faint glow of emergency chemical lights. The constant humming of life support systems fell silent, leaving only the sound of their own breathing and the relentless work of the creatures outside. "Emergency power only," Dr. Thulek announced unnecessarily. 6 hours remaining. In the dim light, the survivors huddled closer together. Species barriers seemed meaningless now. Catherians sat next to hegemony engineers. Centauri researchers leaned against Aquarian medics. They were no longer representatives of different worlds. They were just beings facing the end together. Vex High managed to complete the data transmission using the last of their communication power. The package launched into space like a message, in a bottle, carrying 20 years of scientific discovery toward the inner systems. Whether anyone would receive it or understand its importance was beyond their control. The cutting sounds grew closer, more focused. Through the weakening barriers, they could hear individual hunter voices, clicking, chittering sounds that might have been communication or might have been anticipation. "Barrier failure imminent," Dr. Thalek reported. "Maybe 30 minutes. Some of the survivors began recording final messages for families they would never see again. Others simply sat in contemplative silence. Commander Grelmoth moved through the group, offering quiet words of comfort and thanks for their service. Vex High found herself thinking about the vast emptiness of space surrounding their small station. Light years of vacuum in every direction, filled with wonders they would never see and questions they would never answer. The universe was so large and they were so small, but they had tried. For 20 years they had pushed back against ignorance and mystery. They had turned unknown into known, chaos into understanding. In the end, perhaps that was enough. The final barrier began to fail with a sound like tearing metal. Through the small gap, they could see movement in the darkness beyond. Shapes that reflected the emergency lighting like oil on water. The void hunters had almost reached them. Soon their long wait would be over. The final barrier held for exactly 17 more minutes. Vex High was watching the chronometer when the reinforced metal finally gave way with a groaning shriek that echoed through the laboratory. Emergency chemical lights cast eerie shadows as the breach widened, revealing the darkness beyond. For a moment there was only silence. Then came the chittering. It started as a whisper, like insects in tall grass, but quickly grew to a chorus of clicking, scraping sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The void hunters were communicating, coordinating their final assault. The 47 survivors pressed back against the far wall of the laboratory, some clutching improvised weapons, metal tools, broken equipment, anything that might serve as a last means of defense. Dr. Thalek had managed to jury-rig a plasma cutter into a crude weapon, though everyone knew it would not make much difference. "Remember," Commander Gralmoth said quietly, "we lived as explorers and researchers. We face this as explorers and researchers." The first hunter appeared in the breach like a nightmare made real. In the dim light, its chitinous exoskeleton gleamed with an oily sheen, and its multiple eyes reflected the emergency lighting like black mirrors. It moved with disturbing grace, each of its 6 limbs finding purchase on the twisted metal with precise efficiency. More hunters followed, flowing through the gap like liquid death. They did not rush or attack immediately. Instead, they spread out around the laboratory, studying their prey with the patience of creatures that had all the time in the world. Dr. Kalis whimpered beside Vex High, and the senior researcher found herself reaching out to take the young scientist's hand. The gesture felt futile, but somehow important. If these were to be their last moments, they would face them together. The largest hunter, easily twice the size of the others, approached the huddled survivors. Its mandibles worked constantly, producing a sound like grinding glass. When it spoke, the words came out as electronically modulated clicks and whistles that somehow resolved into recognizable speech. Cytherian Research Station, it said slowly as if tasting each word. 47 life forms detected. The fact that it could speak their language was somehow more terrifying than if it had remained silent. This was not some mindless beast. This was an intelligent predator that had learned their words, their ways, their fears. "We surrender," Commander Growlmoth said, stepping forward despite the obvious futility of the gesture. "Take what you want from the station, but please, let my people live." The hunter's head tilted at an impossible angle, studying the commander with alien curiosity. "Surrender, not relevant. Consumption, inevitable. You will become us." The word sent ice through Vexhi's veins. Not death then, something worse. She had heard rumors about what the Void Hunters did to their victims, stories that civilized beings refused to believe. One of the smaller hunters moved toward the data terminals that lined the laboratory walls. Its claws interfaced directly with the systems, and screens began lighting up as it accessed their research files. The creature's eyes flickered rapidly as it absorbed 20 years of scientific data in mere seconds. "Knowledge. Useful," the large hunter observed. "You have learned much about dead worlds." Dr. Thalek stepped forward, his mandibles clicking with anger. "That research was conducted to help our people find new homes, new resources. We're scientists, not soldiers. We pose no threat to you." The hunter's laugh was like breaking glass. "Threat. Irrelevant. You exist. Therefore, you will be consumed. Your knowledge will become our knowledge. Your forms will serve our purposes." The creature at the data terminal suddenly stopped moving. Its head snapped up and it emitted a rapid series of clicks and whistles. The other hunters responded immediately, their postures shifting from relaxed predators to alert warriors. "What is it?" the large hunter demanded. More rapid communication followed, too fast for the universal translators to process, but the effect on the hunters was obvious. They were agitated, perhaps even concerned. The large hunter moved to the data terminal and interfaced with it directly. After a moment, it turned back to the survivors, with what might have been surprise in its alien features. "Long-range sensors detect an approaching of vessels," it announced. "Unknown configuration, unknown species." Vexhi felt her heart skip a beat. Could it be possible? Had someone actually received their distress signal? Commander Growlmoth tried to hide his own hope. "The Galactic Council fleet, they must have diverted ships to help us." But the hunter was shaking its massive head. "Negative. These ships, not in database, energy, signatures unknown, technology unfamiliar." The creatures began moving with sudden urgency, spreading out to defensive positions around the laboratory. Several disappeared back through the breach, presumably to coordinate with their fellows throughout the station. "Incoming vessels will arrive in 17 minutes," the large hunter announced. "Resistance will be eliminated. Consumption will continue." But for the first time since the siege began, the Void Hunters seemed uncertain. They chittered among themselves in rapid bursts, and their movements carried a tension that had not been there before. Dr. Thalek managed to access a working sensor terminal before one of the hunters could stop him. His compound eyes widened as he read the display. "By the 12 moons," he whispered, "those ships, and they're massive. Energy readings are off the scale. I've never seen anything like this." The large hunter moved to examine the sensor data itself. For a long moment it studied the approaching vessels with what appeared to be genuine confusion. Ships appear from empty space, it said slowly. No, faster than light. Signature detected. Technology unknown. Vexahai found herself staring at the tactical display over the hunter's shoulder. The approaching fleet was indeed unlike anything. In the galactic databases, the vessels were enormous, dwarfing even the hunter's bioships, and their energy signatures suggested weapons and propulsion systems based on completely unfamiliar principles. Who are they? Dr. Keelis whispered. No one had an answer. In a galaxy where every spacefaring species was catalogued and monitored by the Galactic Council, the appearance of unknown vessels was impossible. Yet the sensors did not lie. The large hunter began issuing rapid orders to its subordinates. Several of the creatures flowed back through the breach, presumably to prepare the bioships for combat. Others took defensive positions around the laboratory, their weapon limbs extending and charging with crackling energy. New arrivals will be consumed, the hunter announced with forced confidence. Station will be defended. Feeding will continue. But Vexhai could hear the uncertainty in its electronically modulated voice. For the first time in 3 days, the Void Hunters seemed less than completely confident in their superiority. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Through the station's hull, they could feel vibrations as the hunters prepared their defenses. Bioships repositioned themselves around the research station, their organic weapons charging with bioluminescent energy. 10 minutes to contact, Dr. Thalhek reported from the sensor console. The unknown fleet was decelerating now, dropping out of whatever impossible faster-than-light system they used. As they approached, the sensors began to resolve more details. The ships were clearly artificial, not bioorganic like the hunters' vessels. Their hulls appeared to be some kind of armored metal, scarred and pitted as if they had seen extensive combat. 5 minutes, Dr. Thalek announced. The large hunter moved to the center of the laboratory, its massive form tense with anticipation. Around it, the smaller hunters maintained their defensive positions, but their chittering had taken on a nervous quality. 2 minutes. Through the external sensors, they could see the unknown fleet taking up positions around the research station. The vessels moved with military precision, their formations suggesting naval tactics rather than the fluid organic approach favored by the hunters. 1 minute. The largest of the unknown ships moved closer to the station, and suddenly the communication system crackled to life. A new voice filled the laboratory. Not the electronic clicking of the hunters, but a warm, organic voice speaking in perfectly clear standard galactic. Cytherian Research Station Delta 9, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We received your distress signal and are here to provide assistance. Please respond if you are able. Terran? Vexhai searched her memory, but the term meant nothing to her. No species called Terran appeared in any galactic database she knew of. The large hunter's mandibles worked furiously. Terran, unknown, species, not in collective memory. Commander Grelmoth struggled against the hunter, restraining him, trying to reach the communication console. We're here, he shouted. 47 survivors in the core laboratory. The station has been overrun by void hunters. The voice responded immediately, and something in its tone sent shivers down Vexhai's spine. It was calm, professional, but underneath lay something hard and dangerous. Copy that, survivors. We have you on sensors. 47 life signs confirmed. In the core section, we also detect approximately 300 hostile bioforms throughout the station. Stand by for immediate combat operations. The large hunter emitted a sound like grinding metal. Impossible. No species possesses technology to challenge like the swarm. But even as it spoke, the external sensors showed the unknown ships extending weapon arrays that glowed with contained energy. Whatever these Terrans were, they had come prepared for war. All survivors, this is Admiral Chen. In approximately 60 seconds, we will begin combat operations to retake your station. Remain in secure positions and await extraction. To the hostile forces currently holding the station. The voice paused, and when it continued, the professional calm had been replaced by something cold and implacable. This is your only warning. Release the prisoners and withdraw immediately, or face the consequences. You have 30 seconds to comply. The large hunter's laugh echoed through the laboratory like breaking glass. Foolish aliens. You will learn the power of the swarm. But Vexhai noticed that its claws were trembling. The countdown reached 0, and hell was about to be unleashed. The first salvo came without warning. The research station shuddered as massive energy beams tore through the Void Hunter bioship surrounding it. Through the external sensors, Vexhai watched in stunned amazement as vessels that had seemed invincible simply disintegrated under the assault. The Terran weapons did not just destroy the Hunter ships, they unmade them, reducing bioorganic matter to its component atoms in brilliant flashes of light. The large hunter in the laboratory let out a sound like screaming metal as its psychic connection to the fleet was severed. Its subordinates chittered in panic, their defensive formation beginning to collapse. Impossible, the creature hissed through its electronic translator. No weapon can penetrate adaptive bioarmor. But the evidence was undeniable. In less than 30 seconds, the Terran fleet had eliminated half of the Hunter ships with a precision that spoke of advanced targeting systems and overwhelming firepower. The remaining biovessels tried to scatter, but found themselves surrounded by the unknown fleet. This is Admiral Chen to all hostile forces, the calm voice announced over the communication system. You have failed to comply with our withdrawal ultimatum. We are now implementing Combat Protocol 7. Resistance is futile. Through the sensors, they could see smaller vessels launching from the Terran ships, sleek fighters that moved with impossible speed and agility. The Hunter's bioships turned to engage them, but the smaller craft danced between the organic weapons fire, as if they knew where every shot would be before it was fired. Dr. Thalek stared at the tactical display, with his mandibles hanging open. Their reaction time, it's impossible. No organic brain can process information that quickly. The fighter craft began their attack runs, and the results were devastating. Instead of the energy weapons used by most galactic civilizations, the Terran fighters employed kinetic projectiles that struck with tremendous force. The solid rounds punched through bioarmor that had shrugged off laser fire, creating massive wounds that the organic ships could not heal fast enough to survive. Kinetic weapons, whispered Commander Grelmoth. They're using kinetic weapons against bioships. Brilliant. The large hunter turned toward him with fury in its alien eyes. You know these creatures? No, the commander replied honestly. I've never heard of Terrans before, but whoever they are, they understand warfare better than any species. I know. The battle outside was rapidly turning into a massacre. The Terran fleet moved with coordinated precision, their ships working together like the fingers of a single hand. They did not just attack. They herded the hunter vessels into killing zones where concentrated fire could eliminate them efficiently. But the real shock came when the largest Terran vessel moved closer to the research station. Vexhai could see armored figures gathering in what appeared to be launch bays, soldiers preparing for boarding action. They're coming aboard, she announced. The large hunter emitted rapid clicks and whistles, calling its scattered forces back to defend the station. But many of its subordinates had been killed in the opening bombardment, and the survivors were struggling to maintain defensive positions throughout the facility. Marine assault teams launching now, Admiral Chen's voice announced. All survivors, remain in secure positions. Our people are coming to get you. The creatures on the station began moving with desperate urgency. The large hunter grabbed Dr. Thalek and held one of its razor-sharp claws to the engineer's throat. Tell your saviors, it hissed, that we will kill all prisoners. Before surrender. But before Commander Growlmoth could respond, new sounds echoed through the station, the distinctive whine of cutting tools and the measured footsteps of soldiers in powered armor. The Terran Marines had reached the outer hull and were cutting their way inside. The sounds of combat grew closer with shocking speed. These were not the chaotic battles Vexhai had seen in historical recordings. The Terrans moved with methodical efficiency, advancing through the station like a force of nature. Each engagement was brief and decisive, ending with the distinctive chittering screams of dying hunters. Section 7 cleared, a new voice reported over the communication system. Moving to Section 8, resistance is lighter than expected. The large hunter's claws tightened around Dr. Thalek's throat, drawing a thin line of green blood. Your Marines will find only corpses. But its threat rang hollow. The sounds of battle were moving closer despite the hunter defenses, and the creature's confidence was clearly shaken. A massive explosion shook the laboratory as something detonated in the corridor outside. Emergency lights flickered, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Through the breach in the barrier, they could see flashes of weapon fire and hear the distinctive sound of projectile weapons in action. "Contact front," a voice shouted in the corridor. "Multiple hostiles engaging." The battle was brief but intense. The Terran weapons fire was sustained and accurate, while the hunter return fire grew increasingly sporadic. Within minutes, the IC shooting stopped, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the laboratory. "This is Sergeant Morrison, 1st Assault Marines." A voice called through the breach. "Any survivors in there?" 47 scientists," Commander Growlmoth shouted back. "But be careful. They have hostages." The large hunter pulled Dr. Thalek closer, its claws poised to strike. One step closer, and all die. A figure appeared in the breach, and Vexhai gasped at her first sight of a human being. The creature, for that was what it had to be despite the familiar bipedal form, stood nearly 2 meters tall and was encased in powered armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The armor was scarred and pitted from countless battles, decorated with symbols that meant nothing to her but somehow conveyed menace and authority. The being's face was visible through a transparent faceplate, revealing features that were disturbingly similar to several galactic species, yet distinctly different. Bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes, a central breathing orifice. But the proportions were somehow wrong. Predatory in a way that made her instincts scream warnings. "I'm Captain James Morrison," the armored figure said calmly, his weapon trained on the large hunter. "I'm here to take you people home," the hunter hissed at him. "Move. Away, alien. Or watch them die." Captain Morrison's expression did not change. "I don't think so." What happened next occurred so quickly that Vexhai almost missed it. The human's weapon fired, not at the large hunter, but at a piece of equipment hanging from the ceiling above it. The shot was perfectly placed, sending the heavy machinery crashing down onto the creature's back and forcing it to release Dr. Thalek. Before the hunter could recover, Morrison was moving. He crossed the laboratory in 3 quick strides, his armored form demonstrating speed and agility that should have been impossible for someone his size. His weapon fired again, this time striking the hunter center mass with a projectile that punched completely through its chitinous armor. The creature collapsed with a sound like breaking glass, its life fluid spreading across the laboratory floor. The other hunters in the laboratory tried to respond, but more armored figures appeared in the breach. The Terran Marines moved with coordinated precision, their weapons fire eliminating the remaining threats in seconds. "Area secure," Morrison announced into his communicator. 47 survivors confirmed alive and mobile, beginning extraction. Procedures. More Marines entered the laboratory, and Vexhai got her first good look at human military technology. Their weapons were clearly projectile-based, but far more advanced than anything in the galactic databases. The armor they wore incorporated systems that enhanced their natural capabilities to superhuman levels. But it was their faces that truly disturbed her. These beings looked like they had been born for war. Their eyes held a coldness that spoke, of countless battles, and their movements suggested predators barely held in check by military discipline. "Ma'am," Captain Morrison said, approaching Commander Growlmoth, "we need to move quickly. Our sensors show more hunter bioships approaching this position. We have maybe 10 minutes before this place gets really unpleasant." The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. The Marines formed protective formations around the scientists, guiding them through corridors littered with hunter corpses. HFY tried not to look too closely at the bodies, but she could not help noticing that most had been killed with single, precisely placed shots. "How did you know where to find us?" Dr. Keelis asked one of the Marines as they moved. The soldier's faceplate turned toward her, revealing a face that might have been carved from stone. "Long-range sensors picked up your distress beacon 3 days ago. We've been burning maximum speed ever since." 3 days? But you're in an unexplored sector. How did you get here so quickly? The Marine's expression remained unchanged. "Ma'am, humans don't leave people behind. Ever." They reached the docking bay where Terran assault shuttles waited. The craft were sleek and deadly-looking, clearly designed for combat operations rather than civilian transport. As the survivors were loaded aboard, HFY caught sight of the pilot through the cockpit canopy. Another human, this one younger than Captain Morrison but with the same predatory alertness in his eyes. He gave her a casual wave as she passed, as if rescuing people from nightmare creatures was routine work. "Strap in tight," Morrison announced as the shuttles prepared to launch. "We're going to be moving fast, and our flight path might get interesting." Through the shuttle's viewports, HFY could see the research station falling away beneath them. The facility that had been her home for 20 years was now a tomb, its corridors filled with the bodies of creatures that had seemed invincible just hours before. But the Terrans had made it look easy. As they approached the flagship of the human fleet, HFY found herself staring at the massive vessel in wonder. It was a ship built for war, its hull covered in weapon systems and armor, plating. Symbols and markings covered its surface, battle honors perhaps or unit designations. "Welcome aboard the TES Indomitable," Captain Morrison said as they docked. "Admiral Chen is waiting to debrief you." The 47 survivors were escorted through corridors that hummed with barely contained power. Human crew members moved past them with purposeful efficiency, their faces carrying the same hard competence she had seen in the Marines. These people, she realized, were professional soldiers. All of them. This was not a rescue ship that had happened to be in the area. This was a military vessel, part of a fleet that existed for the sole purpose of fighting wars. And somehow, impossibly, they had crossed the galaxy to save a group of strangers they had never met. The question that haunted her as they walked toward their meeting with the Admiral was simple but terrifying. If humans were willing to do this for people they didn't know, what would they do to enemies who threatened people they cared about? Admiral Sarah Chen was not what HFY had expected. After seeing the armored Marines and their efficient brutality, she had anticipated another warrior. Instead, she found herself facing a woman who could have been a university professor, dressed in a simple blue uniform with minimal decoration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes held intelligence rather than the cold, predatory look of the soldiers. But there was something else in those eyes, a steel core, that suggested this quiet woman was far more dangerous than any of the Marines who had rescued them. "Please sit down," Admiral Chen said, gesturing to chairs arranged around a conference table in what appeared to be the ship's main briefing room. "You've been through a terrible ordeal. Can we get you anything? Food? Medical attention?" The 47 survivors settled into the offered seats with grateful exhaustion. After 3 days of constant fear, the simple act of sitting in safety felt like a miracle. Dr. Thalek, still bearing bandages where the hunter's claws had cut him, spoke first. "Admiral Chen, we cannot express our gratitude for what you've done, but I must ask, who are you? What species are the Terrans? You're not in any of our databases." The Admiral smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. "That's because we're new to this part of the galaxy. Humanity only achieved faster-than-light travel about 50 years ago. We've been exploring outward from our home system, making contact with other civilizations when we encounter them." Commander Growlmoth leaned forward. But how did you receive our distress signal? We're in an unexplored sector, weeks away from any known trade routes. We have monitoring stations throughout this region, Chen explained. Part of our exploration protocol includes establishing communication relays to watch for exactly this kind of situation. When your signal reached Relay Station Echo 7, it was immediately forwarded to our nearest fleet assets. Vexhai found her voice. You maintain military fleets in unexplored space? Why? For the first time, Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Because the galaxy is a dangerous place, Dr. Vexhai. We've learned that lesson repeatedly since we started exploring. There are threats out here that most civilized species prefer not to acknowledge. She activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of the local sector. Red markers indicated known Void Hunter activity, while blue markers showed human fleet positions. We've been tracking the Void Hunters for the past 20 years, Chen continued. They're not just random raiders or pirates. They're something much worse. A coordinated force that seems dedicated to consuming every form of life they encounter. Dr. Keeley stared at the display with wide eyes. But the Galactic Council considers them myths. Scary stories told to frighten children. The Galactic Council, Admiral Chen said with barely concealed disdain, prefers to ignore problems that can't be solved through diplomacy and trade agreements. They've lost entire colonies to Void Hunter attacks, then classified the incidents as unexplained disappearances to avoid panic. She manipulated the display, showing attack patterns and migration routes. We estimate they've consumed approximately 2 million sentient beings over the past century. Entire research stations, mining colonies, even small cities have simply vanished. The numbers were staggering. Vexhai felt sick as she contemplated the scope of the hunters' predation. Why haven't other species fought back? Because they can't, Captain Morrison said from his position near the door. Most galactic civilizations haven't fought a real war in centuries. They've forgotten how to build weapons designed to kill, rather than stun. They depend on diplomacy and economic pressure to solve their problems. Admiral Chen nodded. Humans, unfortunately, remember how to fight wars. We've never had the luxury of assuming that all problems can be solved peacefully. She touched another control, and the display shifted to show the human fleet that had rescued them. Vexhai counted at least 50 vessels of various sizes, all clearly military in design. This is Battle Group 7 of the Terran Expeditionary Force, Chen explained. We've been conducting deep space patrols in this sector for the past 6 months, hunting Void Hunter concentrations and disrupting their operations. You're fighting a war, Commander Grelmoth said slowly. A war against the Hunters. We are, Chen confirmed. Someone has to. We've tried reporting our findings to the Galactic Council, but they're more interested in maintaining the illusion that their diplomatic solutions work for everything. Dr. Thalek's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The weapons your Marines used, kinetic projectiles instead of energy beams, that was intentional. Captain Morrison stepped forward. Hunter bioships can adapt to energy weapons within minutes of first contact. Their organic armor learns to absorb or deflect directed energy attacks, but they can't adapt to physics. A chunk of metal moving at 3,000 meters per second will punch through any armor they can grow. We've also discovered that they have difficulty with certain chemical compounds. Admiral Chen added, human weapons are designed specifically to exploit Void Hunter weaknesses. The implications were staggering. While the rest of the galaxy remained ignorant of the true threat, humanity had been quietly preparing to fight a war against creatures that most species considered fictional. How many ships do you have? Vexhai asked. The expeditionary force consists of approximately 800 vessels across 12 battle groups, Chen replied. Each group is designed for independent operations in deep space, with the capability to engage hunter swarms up to 10 times our size. Medical Officer Rinta spoke up for the first time. Admiral, why are you telling us this? This information seems classified. Chen's smile returned. Because you're going to help us spread the word. The Galactic Council needs to understand what they're really facing out here. Your research station was just one target among hundreds. If the civilized species don't start taking this threat seriously, entire star systems are going to disappear. She stood and moved to a viewport that showed the space around the research station. In the distance, the twisted wreckage of Hunter bioships drifted like cosmic debris. "We eliminated approximately 300 Hunter organisms today," she said quietly. "That's barely a dent in their overall numbers. Intelligence estimates suggest there are millions of them scattered throughout the galaxy, organized into swarms that can overwhelm any conventional defense." "What do you need from Fersen?" Commander Grelmoth asked. "Testimony," Chen replied. "Detailed accounts of what happened at your station, scientific analysis of Hunter biology and technology from beings the Council will respect. Evidence that can't be dismissed or classified away." She turned back to face them. "You're some of the few people who have survived direct contact with Void Hunters. Your voices carry weight that ours cannot. The Council might ignore warnings from unknown humans, but they'll listen to respected researchers from established species." Dr. Keyless raised her hand tentatively. "What if they still don't believe us?" Admiral Chen's expression grew hard. "Then humanity will continue fighting this war alone, while the rest of the galaxy sleeps peacefully in ignorance. We won't abandon innocent people to these creatures, regardless of whether their governments acknowledge the threat." The weight of her words settled over the survivors like a blanket. They had been rescued, but they were also being recruited. Their ordeal was not over. It was becoming the beginning of something much larger. "There's something else you should know," Captain Morrison said. "The Hunter swarm that attacked your station was relatively small. Intelligence suggests they were scouts for a much larger force moving through this sector." "How much larger?" Dr. Thalik asked, though his tone suggested he dreaded the answer. "Conservative estimates put the main swarm at 50,000 organisms," Chen replied. "Enough to consume every inhabited system within 100 light-years." The silence that followed was deafening. 50,000 Void Hunters represented a catastrophe beyond imagination. Entire worlds stripped of life, civilizations reduced to organic matter for alien consumption. "But we have a plan," Admiral Chen continued. "Operation Lighthouse, a coordinated strike against the main swarm using concentrated human forces. We can stop them, but only if we know where they're going." She activated the display again, showing projected Hunter movement patterns. "Your research data, combined with intelligence from other sources, might help us predict their target. If we can intercept them in deep space, away from inhabited systems, you can destroy them." Vexhai finished. "We can try," Chen said simply. "But we need help. We need the resources and knowledge of the galactic community. We need them to stop pretending this threat doesn't exist." Commander Grelmoth stood slowly. "What do you want us to do?" "Go home," Admiral Chen said. "Return to your respective worlds and governments. Tell them what you've seen. Show them the evidence. Make them understand that the universe is not as safe as they believe." She moved to a console and began entering commands. "We'll provide transport to any destination you choose. Our ships are fast. You'll reach the inner systems weeks ahead of schedule." "And then?" Medical Officer Rinta asked. "Then you help us save the galaxy," Admiral Chen replied. "One mind at a time, one government at a time, one species at a time. We convince them to join the fight before it's too late." As the survivors prepared to leave the briefing room, Vexhai found herself thinking about the data transmission she had sent during their final hours on the station. 20 years of research, compressed into a single package and launched into space. Now she realized that their real discovery had nothing to do with mineral surveys or geological data. They had learned that humanity existed, a species strong enough to fight monsters that terrified the rest of the galaxy, and generous enough to risk everything for strangers. The question was whether the civilized worlds would be wise enough to accept the help they desperately needed. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, beautiful and serene. But Vexhai knew now that darkness moved between those stars, hungry and patient and infinitely dangerous. Somewhere out there, 50,000 nightmares were coming. But for the first time since the hunters had arrived at her station, she dared to hope. Because humanity had not come to the galaxy as conquerors or traders or diplomats. They had come as guardians, and they had just proven that when darkness fell, when hope seemed lost, when death itself came calling, the humans would step out of the blackness and say no. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant.